Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I am proud to serve as the chairman of the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, and I'm very honored to participate in our 5th annual summit. While Carnegie India has always ensured that the summit is global in orientation, this year it is truly global in audience and in the caliber of speakers and engagement. We are covering critical topics regarding digital transformation and the future of innovation. As such, I'm very excited about our next conversation. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft. There are 3 things I want you to know about Satya. First, Satya is a phenomenal leader that believes that a strong culture eats strategy for lunch. As a Microsoft board member, I am privileged to see Satya's leadership up close. He has built an incredibly dynamic culture that is reflected in the work the company does around trust, around sustainability, around the priority it places on diversity, and fundamentally its steadfast commitment to all its stakeholders. Second, Satya has taught me the meaning of a growth mindset, which means that all Microsoft employees are encouraged to be creative, adaptive, resilient, open to new ideas, basically lifelong learners. And third, Satya is just a genuinely terrific human being whom I'm really proud to know and call my friend. So Satya, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you so much, Penny, and it's really an honor to be able to join you on this call.
I appreciate it. Well, let's jump right into it. And let me start with a question about the long-term impact of COVID-19 pandemic on innovation. In the past 9 months, companies have been quick in repurposing themselves, their economic, their technological resources to adapt to new consumer demands. We've seen growing interest on online shopping, greater social media activity, increased reliance on cloud services. Does this represent a fundamental change in the way companies are going to operate into the future? And what long-term effects will the pandemic have on the innovation landscape?
Absolutely, Penny. This is just the most unprecedented of circumstances. None of us could have anticipated it. The constraints that the pandemic has put in our broader society, how we live and our economies, is something that none of us could have imagined. But yet, Penny, the one thing that I think about is we've been able to sustain the level of even just the economic activity that the world has been able to sustain, even given all the constraints, is pretty stunning to me. And I think it's thanks to some of the technology that just got put in place in the last 4 or 5 years. The cloud, in some sense, has been a big element of creating that business continuity. So 2 things that come to mind is both transformative effects of digital technology and the impact technology can have around resilience. Both have become board-level discussion items for every organization. And there's structural change also, Penny. For example, take a retail company. Every retail company, whether it's small or large, now needs to be ready for curbside pickup. So that means it's new digital infrastructure, right? We've talked about telemedicine for decades. There will never be an outpatient visit that you or I will take that won't start with an AI bot first and then a telemedicine visit and then ultimately an outpatient ward visit. And manufacturing, same thing. The number of people who are able to sustain critical manufacturing with lights out, with these digital twins is fascinating to see. So I think there's going to be real structural change. And even in the context of India, Penny, I've been tracking, whether it's Apollo hospitals and what they're doing with their own medical care, Mahindra and Mahindra in manufacturing, or even, what Myntra is doing in fast fashion and how they're using data to do personalization. So some of the startups like iMocha are in skilling on how they're able to ensure that assessments can be done fast. So it's great to see, whether it's in the United States or whether it's in an emerging market like India, how technology is playing a pretty significant role, bringing the structural change.
Well, Satya, building on what you just said, if you think about the future of work, the future of skilling, You've spoken about how there are new collaboration habits that we're all forming. Will that persist beyond this crisis? Are we going to be in an era where it's either all remote or all at work? Are we going to adopt hybrid habits? How does this current healthcare crisis change the way we're going to work? And what does work look like in the future when we get back to something where we can be present physically with one another?
No, it's a great question, Penny. And in fact, as you know, we've been studying this deeply. One of the things that we do now have is good longitudinal data, right? In the last 9 months, how is the impact on whether it is productivity, well-being, many dimensions of work, and by function, by industry, by country. And the reality is it's pretty different. And so to your point, I think time will tell, but there definitely will be more what people describe as hybrid. But I would say there are 3 dimensions, Penny, that at least I am focused on. One is collaboration, which is about bringing people together to accomplish anything. That fundamentally will change because, for example, even during the pandemic, one of the bigger breakthroughs was how do you bring, let's say, somebody who's in the front line together with somebody who's an expert who's remote. Using even a technology like HoloLens, an engineer in the headquarters can now reach a frontline technicians, teach them, help them fix, empower them to be much more productive. I think that's going to be something that at scale will transcend really the challenges of distance. A second area is, of course, work happens in meetings, that is synchronous, but also work happens before and after. In fact, when we built Teams, that was the idea. Teams was built so that we can coordinate the entirety of the work, asynchronous and synchronous. And coming out of this pandemic, I think that's what's going to give us the tool for that hybrid, flexible work. And another aspect, Penny, which I think is very important is learning, right? When you bring on new people. After all, the theory of the corporation is that you build continuous knowledge inside the company by connecting people and their expertise. And so we're learning a lot about how do you deliver content as part of the workflow. How do we in fact even help foster the social connections so that the expertise that's available inside the company is on tap for you. And lastly, well-being, right? Instead of talking narrowly about productivity, we should think about the overall well-being of anyone, whether it's on the front lines or whether it's knowledge work. And so we have a lot of data. How do we use the data to give the nudges to people to spend it on things that matter the most so that promotes their well-being? So those will be the 3 areas of fundamental change: collaboration, learning, and well-being, that I think are all going to be things that we'll be talking a lot about in this new form of hybrid work.
Yeah, I can say, Satya, I've experienced this personally. The ability for a team member to collaborate with me by the virtue of their ability not just to see my screen, but to actually be on my computer or be in my be brought digitally into my space is so much more effective. I could see that not going away out of my life. And we don't, our day-to-day team is not that large. And your point about before and after meetings is absolutely critical. You become really clear about all the information that has to get brought into one place to take the productivity forward. And you can see how important the digital tools are for that. And training is absolutely essential for all of us because the tools are constantly evolving. So, but taking that last point, this idea about digital inclusion, one of the key challenges that we all face in the tech companies, particularly society at large, is, how do we have digital inclusion? How do we ensure that diversity in our societies is reflected on our digital platforms? How do we ensure that there's access? The challenge has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, as more people, including those from low-income groups, are forced to employ digital tools, but they don't even have, in some cases, the fundamental infrastructure, let alone the devices. What are some ways in which tech companies have successfully or unsuccessfully at times pivoted to tackle this problem? I think there's a huge opportunity here. I think with an eye on India, how do we innovate for the next 500 million as Prime Minister Modi talks about? And, where do those opportunities and challenges lie?
No, you're absolutely right, Penny. I think that if we sort of look at the next 10 years and if we were having this conversation in 2030, I think the conversation that we will be having is, did we achieve the goal that we set out of taking some of the great advances in technology and truly democratizing their access? And starting with, skilling, Penny, even as part of this pandemic, one of the things that I was very thrilled about was even bringing our own learning assets from GitHub to LinkedIn Learning to Microsoft Learn and really making it broadly available. And, even today, 13 million plus people are really building those skills and credentials, because credentials are super important for them to be able to realize their economic opportunity. And so that's a great start. To your point about in the context of India and what Prime Minister Modi has set as a goal, that's where I know we are doing a lot, even working with some of the organizations. With NASSCOM, for example, we have a goal of really making sure by 2021 even, we have 1 million plus people trained on some of the AI skills. And AI skills are not just for the engineers with CS degrees, they're even for frontline workers to be able to use AI to automate, to create efficiencies. Similarly, we're also working with NSDC on their skilling initiative. And so I think skilling is one very important area. The other one you mentioned, Penny, is access. Before we talk about sort of digital tech, you need to have access, and broadband is one of those challenges, which is how do we, and India has benefited from, in fact, broad penetration of things like 4G and now coming with 5G. But beyond that, how do we make sure every rural community and every underserved community has access to broadband? And we're working with nonprofits like Air Jaldi to ensure that they have that ability to have access and devices, as you mentioned. And lastly, one of the, I think a lot about, disability groups and how are they, if you think about what has happened with the pandemic, right? Because everything is now computer mediated. Because of the lack of broad spread of accessibility tech, it's been a real challenge for people to participate in our society and economy. So even here, we're working with the SBI Foundation to ensure that we are doing some of our best work to create more of the equity for everybody, and irrespective of their abilities to be able to participate in our societies going forward. So those are some of the examples, Penny, I think, of what is probably a decade-long important work that all of us will have to come together and do.
Well, you talked, Satya, about partnership, and I want to just ask you about, government-private sector cooperation, particularly in driving innovation in India. One of the focus areas for the government of India has been its flagship Digital India program, which even when I was at the Secretary of Commerce, they were just kicking that off. While the government can create a vision to transform India into a digitally empowered society, it needs partners to be able to, achieve that vision. And, how can the government work with industry or companies like Microsoft to create, outcomes and policies that help invest in new ideas and strategies to support inclusive digital societies?
I think, Penny, for me, India stands out, whether it's the Prime Minister Modi's emphasis on creating the Digital India framework and even some of the core tech. What people reference as the India stack is pretty impressive. I know even Bill Gates is always talking about how can we take what has been developed in India and make it available as a stack to all countries. So I think it's pretty inspired set of choices that, quite frankly, came about because of the state prioritizing that digital infrastructure as a public good can help lift all companies and all citizens' benefits in India. And that's great to see. But to your point, like, for example, as a multinational company participating in India, to me, what is most important is how do we are putting our capital to work to build out the data centers. And now that the data center capacity is available means that the smallest of businesses in India can tap into our capacity on a most efficient pricing mechanism to be globally competitive, right? That's the change. So, like most economists talk about catch-up growth, but for the first time, and I think about the quality of the entrepreneurs, the quality of the companies coming out of India, they're world-class. And that's because of both things happening. The state itself promoting that through skilling and infrastructure, and more importantly, even companies like us investing in the local economy so that the local entrepreneurs, the small businesses, the multinationals, and even the public sector are becoming more efficient in the country. So, I think that there's a lot that can be done through Digital India to benefit every Indian citizen and every Indian company. And that's what our goal is, to really make sure that we're engaged there.
Well, Satya, I'm first of all, I'm proud to be a board member of Microsoft and really proud of the work that we're doing all over the world, but especially in India. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your taking some of your valuable time to share your insights with all of us. And happy
Thank you very
holidays.
much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Penny.
Thank
Happy
you to the
holidays to you
audience
as well.
and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rishi.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.